I want to admit I know a lot more about Luigi Mangione than most of you do because I have friends of friends who know him and I have friends who know his family, and it'd be weird if I shared any of these details with you. See, for anyone who's followed me for any amount of time, they've likely heard me say that I've lived in Baltimore, and for some of you, you may say, sure, why is that a big deal? Because north of Baltimore is Towson, the hometown of Luigi Mangione, located in Baltimore County, and with the news of his potential involvement in the death of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, I then started having friends who came out of the woodwork saying that they knew his family, or friends of friends who knew the man himself or went to high school with him. Baltimore is also sometimes called lovingly Smaltimore, emphasizing the cozy nature of the city and the inability to avoid anyone, leading me to actually have an experience the other day where I was sitting outside of a coffee shop and heard two strangers share an intimate story about the man from his early college years. Luigi attended Gilman School, a private school in the area that costs nearly $40,000 to attend as a high schooler during the current academic year, and is amongst one of the most expensive private schools in Maryland. While many people worldwide are only familiar with Baltimore through The Wire or hit pieces from the media about how dangerous the city is, it's a city with a weird private school culture, of which there are a little over 3 dozen between the city and the county, which have largely maintained a similar level of controversy of covering up abuse within these schools, or at least that's what it appears to be on the outside. But being the former school of Luigi Mangione has overshadowed anything else about Gilman, especially with Luigi being known to be a former star student and the valedictorian of his class, which also speaks to his wealthy upbringing. Circling back to my initial point about the man's secrets, one, I think it's immoral to share any of them here due to this format and recognizing that this is not a gossip page or a true crime YouTube page. We're here to talk movies, and because of my inability to know who the man was, which can arguably be said for many in his close proximity who are shocked by any of the news surrounding his potential crime, but also because I don't want to stoke the flames fueling a parasocial public hungry for a new shirtless pic from before December 4th, 2024, seeking out the newest photo of the freshly cut Italian-American heartthrob. There are so many shallow ways that people have engaged with the man himself and not any of his potential actions. People have been unwilling to critique the vanity surrounding their relationships with the man and have been unable to reflect on how the death of Brian Thompson brought on more feeling of immediate change for some than voting due to corporate money from healthcare insurance providers and pharmaceutical companies poisoning any progress. Instead, choosing to focus on the attractiveness of the man, gawking at his physique, and ignoring any potential to drive any change in the future, even at a level of non-violence. There is no change that comes from what happened on December 4th, 2024, because none of us are willing to question our own behavior. We are all guilty of this. But we also do this with any true crime story or court case that can be translated into a podcast or investigative documentary that releases before he even comes out to trial, while young teens, wine moms, and road truckers with grueling and cumbersome commutes find some cheap thrill sipping on hot cocoa and sitting underneath a blanket while they listen to an online personality be a little bit too giddy sharing the upsetting violent details of harm to an audience that wants to endlessly consume with reckless abandon and never plunge into the sobering reality that these stories are reflective of a pain and trauma of many, way beyond Luigi. This is just any true crime story. And all this speaks to a growing obsession in industry around true crime, and as we're nearly a year past Luigi Mangione's alleged crime, and I reflect on how little the world has changed, the reception of the public has actually made me think about two different movies that I've loved in recent years. Red Room's one of the most underrated horror films of 2024, and one that I easily believe defines our modern day relationship to true crime through a deeply disturbing tale of an obsessive fan of a violent criminal, as well as May December, a film steeped in controversy due to its semi-biographical nature, as it was likely inspired by the story of Mary Kay Letourneau and Billy Fualau, and Letourneau preying on this man as a young boy, having children and a marriage with him, before Fualau recognized that this behavior was abuse. And also with May December, there's been this conversation about if the narrative is really about these two, and that is so vastly uninteresting compared to the conversation about the narrative often ignored when talking about the film, which is how this industry of true crime is often a cheap recreation of someone's trauma for garbage entertainment, and oftentimes makes us all guilty of living in a recreation of the pain of someone else's experience. Because of this today, I want to take some time to talk about the Red Rooms, May December, and go deeper into their connection to Luigi Mangione, and speak about our larger complicity as a society and as individuals when we take advantage of these real life stories for commercial gain. And I also want to share a real story about a friend of mine who sadly lost her life in an act of violence with as much ambiguity as I can in order to protect her family and her memory, and talk honestly about how true crime exploits the lives of those around us. My name is James, this is Movie Good or Movie Bad, and there may be followers of mine who are quite shocked to see that, James, this is your Halloween video, and yes, I wanted to focus on Red Rooms, I want to focus on May December, and while the former is a horror film, I really want to focus on real life horror this year. I think this was a topic that I've just been thinking about for the past couple of months, and I couldn't help but talk about it on here. For those that want a much more traditional Halloween video, there will be a horror series retrospective that'll come out next week. The series is one that I believe that not many people have talked about on here before. It's a very well-known series, and it's a video that will naturally be a lot more fun than this. There will be full spoilers for Red Rooms in May, December. I think you'll still love those films if you do check out this video first. If you want to pause this video and come back, that's completely okay too. Both the films are wonderful. They're seriously two of my favorites of the 2020s and two of my favorites of all time. If you do enjoy this video, please like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell, follow me on other places. You get the gist, you get the idea. I've got lots of fun video essays that are out right now. I've got lots of fun video essays that are coming out for the rest of the year of all sorts of genres, so do check them out. Now to start the video, I think it might be a really good idea to give a summary of Red Rooms, just because there might be some people who haven't seen it, they don't know what they're stepping into, or other people might need a refresher. In Red Rooms, we follow Kellyanne, a quiet, not quite cold, but frozen in appearance fashion model in Montreal, who's decided to attend the trial of Ludovic Chevalier, a man who's been accused of taking the lives of 3 teenage girls and documented them through illicit online streams watched by anonymous viewers in the titled Red Rooms. It's clear by the time of the trial, the court of the public has already made their opinions about the man, whether they're fans who believe of the innocence of Chevalier, maybe because of their attraction to the man, or belief that the use of a balaclava, or as we call it in Baltimore, a shiesty, makes it hard to determine whether or not he's guilty. And of course, there's an understandable backlash to this and disgust over the man's alleged actions and his notable fan base's existence. While Kellyanne is patiently sitting with other observers, she bonds with a young fan named Clementine, a woman who used all of her funds to travel to the trial and is currently in a homeless shelter because of it. They bond because of the shared fascination between this case and this criminal. While Clementine has an undying enthusiasm and believes that Chevalier is innocent, Kellyanne is much more reserved and contained underneath this rigid stature. It becomes quite clear if you look at her behavior more. It's a little unclear why exactly she is there. She is fascinated, but we don't actually know much about her as a person. But because of Clementine's presence and the natural conversation spun off of her, we do get some more of those details about Kellyanne, specifically her tech-savvy nature, which has led to her developing her own voice-controlled AI and makes most of her money gambling using crypto, with it only then being revealed to the audience, not Clementine, that Kellyanne has begun stalking the mother, the final victim, and the only victim of which there was not a snuff film that was obtained by authorities. Returning to another day of the trial, footage from the first 2 snuff films from the first 2 victims of Chevalier are played to the court, and public observers are asked to leave the room. As that footage is played and Clementine clearly longs to watch these tapes, it becomes also clear to her that Kellyanne has watched these snuff tapes through the dark web, and despite the hesitancy of Kellyanne towards showing the tapes, she does end up showing the tapes to Clementine, leading her to bawl at the sight of the violence and having clarity over Chevalier's guilt, and causes Clementine to take a bus immediately home, but also be perplexed at Kellyanne's inability to describe her interest in the case when talking about it after watching the tapes. Next is likely the most evil scene in the film, and the scene most talked about in online discussion about the movie, which is Kellyanne choosing to go to court the next day, choosing to dress up as the final girl whose life was taken away by Chevalier with fake braces, a schoolgirl uniform, and also a blonde wig, leading to Kellyanne to be removed from the courtroom and instantly lose her modeling job as the incident was well publicized within the news. And in a shocking finale to an already alarming series of instances within the film, Kellyanne is able to gain knowledge of an auction for this 3rd snuff film that's never been released before, gains access to it, and chooses to destroy her AI in the event that she's being monitored by the police. She then watches the snuff film, sneaks into this young girl's bedroom, takes selfies wearing the schoolgirl outfit from before, leaves a USB with the snuff film for the mother of this girl, never really providing any clarity for her actions, and then the film concludes with Chevalier pleading guilty with the reveal of this tape, and Clementine on television publicly renouncing being a groupie and expressing support for the victims. Wow, what a happy ending if we just ignore everything that Kellyanne has just done and everyone else in the film. Now, immediately I have to say, what a film. Red Rooms is incredible. Please check it out if you haven't seen it already. And for others, they might be saying, you know, James, there's a big difference between Chevalier and Luigi Mangione. And I have to say, yeah, there's a huge, huge difference, but there's not a difference in the way that we engage with both of these two, even though one is fictional. Regardless of your thoughts on Luigi Mangione's guilt or the morality of his decision to act out in violence if he did do what he did, we can both intellectually understand and empathetically align with anyone's frustrations about the American healthcare system, whether it is the cost of premiums and copays, the denial of service for most major healthcare concerns, including cancer or various surgeries due to a lack of willingness to provide coverage. And for those that have United Healthcare as their healthcare insurance plan, it is especially awful. When compared to other major providers, United United Healthcare has been notorious for denying claims, including denying 19% of claims in-network and 37% of claims out-of-network in 2023 nationwide. It is not shocking at all that any of this happened if conservative moms and my siblings' friends growing up are openly talking on Facebook about actually, this all makes sense to me, my loved ones have been really harmed by this system, why did this make more change than voting? Then clearly the system is broken, there is an understanding to his actions. The same cannot be said of Chevalier, seemingly taking the life of 3 young girls and having it well documented in the dark and seedy corners of the internet, but regardless, there is a deep parasocial relationship between those in the film with Chevalier and those in the real world with Luigi Mangione, and the inability to parse apart that we know very little about these people, and oftentimes our relationships to these people are wildly bizarre. And before we talk more about the film, I really want to interrogate the question, what do we actually know about Luigi Mangione? Because there have been a multitude of investigative documentaries about the man online that 1, are received extremely poorly online, 2, no, I will not be watching or talking extensively about these documentaries, they're absurd, they're ridiculous, whether we're talking about who is Luigi Mangione, or Manhunt Luigi Mangione and the CEO Killer, or New York Post presents Luigi Mangione Monster or Martyr, or TMZ investigates Luigi Mangione Mind of a Killer, because of the ways that they exist to commercialize and create the industry of true crime, and 3, craft a narrative around a man that we really know nothing about and can even question the legitimacy of the claims of his crimes due to the NYPD publicizing so many details of the investigation. And in the early days of the search for the alleged killer of Brian Thompson, there was lots of misinformation about what exactly happened and also who this person was. The NYPD polluted the evidence pool of a man they attempted to place terrorism charges on, and most importantly in the case of the media, attempting to dissuade the working class of challenging the ruling class in any way again, which, to be clear, I'm not publicly supporting any instances of violence, I'm just providing rationale for them, but it's immediately notable to recognize how the public responded in such a visible form of support for Luigi, and appears to be an outlier as an incident. And again, I want to distance myself from the true crime elements that could arise when talking about Luigi Mangione, but I also need to talk about him as a person and what we actually know, because we do know so little about the man, and even in instances where I knew others who knew him or knew his family or overheard casual conversation in Baltimore around the man himself, who knows if any of that's true or based in rumor? Who knows if I'm lying for the sake of a video? Who knows if friends and family actually knew Luigi or they're lying about who he is because they want some kind of street cred? The basic facts that we know about Luigi Mangione is that he grew up in a family of considerable wealth in Baltimore County, with his grandfather Nicholas Mangione being a real estate developer owning an elderly care facility, a radio station, country clubs, hotels, and resorts, and this income would likely help Luigi to become the student that he was at Gilman School, where he was valedictorian. He would go to the University of Pennsylvania and gain a bachelor's in computer engineering and a master's in computer and information science, and would also work on Civilization 6. Fun fact, Fire Access Games, who's made these Civilization games, is actually in Hunt Valley, Maryland, which is just north of Towson, where Luigi is from. He seemed to be fascinated in AI for large chunks of high school and college, seemed to have mixed political views, injured his back in Hawaii, and eventually issues with his health insurance led to his supposed actions, which police have said have been odd due to his insurer not being United Healthcare, and now leading to a mixture of analysis about his appearance now since being incarcerated, either due to the consistent care that's given to his physical appearance whenever he's appeared in court due to fellow inmates wanting to cut his hair or thread his eyebrows to show that he's protected, and that if anything happens to him, they will know. Or also the public seeing his newest fit and deciding to buy it, such as when his court appearance in February 2025 led to an increase in web searches by 1,400% for Luigi Mangione loafers and 500% for Luigi Mangione ankles. And while not the majority, there are still people trying to understand his political beliefs. And aside from parsing apart who is following on social media and his reviews of various texts across his Goodreads account, the most immediate insight into his beliefs was a letter that he shared ahead of his February 2025 court appearance, which included 27 things the man was grateful for: friends, family, the individuals that he's come across because of this journey, letters that have provided him clear company during his time incarcerated, the mailroom which has provided him letters from over 40 countries, memes, the countless books that he's read, independent media and creators, his cellmate Jay, the staff and correctional officers at this facility, Chicken Thursdays and Sweet Baby Ray's sauce, keyboard shortcuts, 30,000 individuals who provide the $1 million to his legal fund, Karen Friedman Agnifilo, his lawyer, the other members of his legal team, Latinas for Mangione, those who've donated to his commissary, the Bureau of Prisons music catalog, which he's revealed that he's been listening to Taylor Swift and Charlie XCX, and now Lil Durk, the trials he's endured, his lucky long sleeve hearts, creatives in general, the conservatives who fiercely conserve the aspects of our society that make us great, liberals who liberate us from the outdated aspects of our society that prevent us from being the greatest, being born in America, free speech, and light being his 27th thing. Aside from the specific naming of Latinas for Mangione, none of this is really shocking in any way, even his equal thinking of conservatives and liberals, because of how all this aligned with his previous internet footprint, leading to the fact that this is a man who is a centrist, who may not even have the strongest political convictions or alignment at all. He can just recognize a corrupt and flawed system despite his class privilege, and potentially lost it all in an alleged wanting to make this change. This is all we know about Luigi Mangione, and I think it's understandable that he's been supported and respected in the ways that he has, but I'm also not putting the man on trial here. We're the ones on trial. We're the ones who need to be investigated here, and we're the ones who are likely guilty. Returning back to the discussion about Red Rooms, those in the film community as a whole, horror fans, and anyone who stumbled across this film online found themselves understandably disgusted with Kellyanne, a woman whose eyes show an empty and vacuous void looking to absorb whatever comes her way, desensitized to the horrors that she's witnessed, only showing a semblance of emotion when losing her source of income or potentially losing a poker game for Bitcoin to purchase this final snuff film, and entering a state of panic only when being afraid of being caught. We can question her motives when thinking about her initial hesitancy to avoid showing these snuff films in the first time, but also wonder why she chose to show the videos in the first place. And while at the very surface level there is some interpretation that there is a happy ending at the end, Chevalier goes to prison, the young girls get justice, Clementine recognizes, you know what, Chevalier is a bad person, there can easily be questioning of why Kellyanne chose to relinquish her control of the snuff tape that she's received access to at the end. It could have easily been some form of guilt based on her actions. It could have also been because of her fears of the police also finding her literally complicit in withholding information about this crime, or it could have been that she was driven by the ways so many people who engage with true crime are and feel the need to become detectives the public feels that they can't have, a common occurrence with people who act like their investigative skills can find the truth, but oftentimes cause more harm in their stereotyping, lack of training or education around the topic, and sometimes misinform the public in a variety of ways through the ways that they share this information online. In a 2022 study by the University of Texas Permian Basin, over half of the participants in a study named their approval for the genre, and 13% named it as their favorite genre. Over half also claimed it to potentially solve cold cases. 1 in 3 Americans said they consumed it once a week, 1 in 4 Americans said they consumed it more than once, and shocking to me, of the participants who consumed true crime, 52% said it was through TV shows. Films made up 39%, which seemed high until I considered documentaries, and those are all over the place when thinking about every streaming platform. 23 was reading books, 20 was watching online videos like the one that I've made for all of you now, and only 17 listened to podcasts, which was hugely shocking for me. I feel like we have such a wild misinterpretation of who these true crime fanatics are in media because these podcasts make up so little of what people are engaging with. Most people engage with content involving murder, and then serial killers, and then kidnapping, and then organizing crime, and women are much more likely than men to listen to these stories about violent crime. And to share as balanced of a perspective as I can, people who are proponents of true crime believe it brings awareness to unsolved crime, it can build empathy towards victims, and make people much more vigilant, and my rebuttal to this is I think it makes people needlessly paranoid. It makes them think that they're detectives and provide wild misinformation, it exploits the real violence that has happened to people, and you don't need to know the intimate details of how a crime has affected someone's life to understand or experience empathy towards them. And to say that it builds empathy largely disregards how disposable these stories are to people who engage with true crime. Just engaging as much of the criticism as I can, one of the most striking and repeated critiques was when people became upset at podcast hosts for making light of a passing of these subjects that they talked about. Now I'll admit this, I'm a huge fan of dark humor, I can make light of most situations, I find humor in just about anything, but it's far different when I'm making a joke about something that's happened to me or someone that I know and there's some light ribbing versus, us making fun of a stranger because we think, aha, it's funny, but really we've turned their pain or their trauma into content and we don't even know if that's how they're sitting with it. It was really shocking to read the stories of loved ones and family who actually found true crime podcasts about their loved ones after they passed, and it actually made me do something that I now deeply regret. And I'll make this clear, I'm very hesitant to include this in the video or my script. I don't want this to be drawn out because I think it's a very deeply upsetting thing, and at the same time, I feel like to share my real reaction is so important with all of you, because not many people know this. I actually had a friend who died in a very violent crime. She was stalked. She was killed in her apartment. I will not give any more of the details about what exactly happened, but I will say this. I decided to look up for the first time, had any true crime media been made about her, and I was very, very alarmed to come across Six Podcast. And I'll be very transparent. I don't think there's any part of me ever that could listen to these podcasts. I think what happened was so upsetting. The violence surrounding it was so upsetting. To read her mother's Facebook post the next day was so upsetting. To understand the circumstance and how so many people could have intervened, at least in the ways that they could have, and maybe that was her trying to rationalize it or make sense of it. I could never hear anybody's recreation of that or telling the story of that. I think every single one of these podcasts, as I looked at them and read their descriptions and read what was going on, she was just belittled into content. She was just another story. She was just another person, another victim. And I don't think any of them framed her well, just even from what I saw. I don't want to give these people views. I don't want to exploit her trauma or her family's trauma. I have a pit in my stomach and my throat talking about this. It is still deeply upsetting years later. She was a very close friend to me for a very long time. She was a friend who was there for me for a very, very hard time during my teenage years. She was an older friend who looked out for me, who cared for me, who was there for me. We weren't close near the end, but we were close. And she was the brightest person in the room. She was so deeply funny. She was so kind. She was so compassionate. If I tried to say something bad about her, I really couldn't. And that's not just even because of the circumstances of what happened to her. She was just that amazing as a person. And I can't imagine her family or her friends receiving, a podcast invitation to talk about this, or to stumble across this podcast, or to walk into a cafe and talk to somebody or go on a date and say, oh, I love this true crime podcast. I listen to this. This is my favorite episode. And it happens to be about this person. I just can't wrap my head around any of that. I don't have any judgments towards anybody who engages with true crime. But the circumstances of it all, and the fact that I just did this cursory Google search, it horrifies me. It is mortifying. This is a real person's story. Her life in so many ways has been framed around this perpetrator or this action or this one really awful thing that happened to her that ended her life. And there's no consideration for her entire personhood. There's a complete forgetting of the fact that she was such a lovely person, and nobody knows that. The fact that I saw podcasts made weeks after everything that happened and they didn't even catch the guy until then. I think that is what really alarms me. It really disgusts me. And I just want you to know, if you're engaging in true crime, there's a person on the other side. And I also feel the need to share this tiny portion of this discovery, and truthfully, the rest of this was unpacked in my own personal therapy, because when we talk about the Red Rooms, we mostly talk about the Kellyannes of the world. The people who exploit and take advantage of this real harm without consideration of those in the world. And while I think we can understand there needs to be a greater conversation about exploitation through true crime, we also tend to think about the outliers, fringe, and furthest end examples. For as much controversy as the newest Ryan Murphy television show garners, which for me feels most present in conversations I've had about the anthology show Monster, which has covered Jeffrey Dahmer in season 1, the Menendez brothers in season 2, and Ed Gein in season 3, these shows are still amongst some of the most watched on Netflix, regardless of the critique towards the tastefulness of the shows or the overall low quality of these shows. We're still engaging with these shows in overwhelming numbers. They're panned pretty poorly across the board. There's been think piece after think piece about how the Menendez brothers' attempts to be on parole and being released have been hindered by the sensationalism and lack of accuracy in telling their story, specifically with this show. Sharing these stories so carelessly provides overwhelming harm to so many, and sure, for some, they're engaging with these stories thoughtfully or telling them thoughtfully, and we can also frame true crime as a nonfiction narrative, and we share nonfiction all the time. And when we draw that line and look what Kellyanne did in Red Rooms and view this with such vitriol, there is no doubt or question about how awful her actions were. But what about Clementine? We should let people change and we should let them be better, but she was also so willing to watch these snuff films even when Kellyanne protected her. Kellyanne is clearly worse, but was Clementine good because of that? Not to frame things in a morally good or bad dichotomy, I think that's problematic, but what about other observers in this courtroom? Sure, there were lawyers or law students there, maybe some journalists, but who else was in the crowd? Who else would want to witness this? And outside of some journalists, maybe there were also some true crime podcast hosts or YouTubers, or maybe some Chevalier defenders who were able to get inside the courtroom and compose themselves. I mean, we even saw Kellyanne and Clementine. What about the people on the talk show who were talking about if Chevalier was or was not innocent? When does simple televised conversation drift into the territory of being exploitative? Is it because there's a camera on them? Is it because of the audience? Is it because of how we're engaging with the story? Is there any way to tell this story without being exploitative? Are all these conversations exploitative? What makes anyone guilty or not guilty in the ways that people consume these stories? Again, no one is bad for engaging with true crime as a genre. I technically chronically do, but how often are these stories treated in a way where we consume and dispose and consume and dispose again? Am I guilty for even acknowledging that I knew the stories that I did about Luigi Mangione and using them as a hook or a bait for people to stick with this video? Am I guilty for sharing my real reaction to a friend's violent passing in this video, or is it just simple transparency about how I feel? What if you watch this and you view my honesty as content? Does my intention ever really matter? Truthfully, I think all these things matter. I don't think I want to sit here and quantify what I think is worse or not worse, but I think there's this overall commercialization or industry around true crime that is really insidious, and most of us don't even think about it. It's just a story that we pick up, we dispose, and that's it. But I want to make this very clear with my intention for this video. I'm not here to put everybody absolutely on trial. I'm not here to say that what you're doing is good or bad. I just want you to think about it. We should have a meta-analysis. We should think about these things. The way that we think about these things is so much more rich than just kind of viewing any true crime podcast or book or TV show or movie as just simple fact or nonfiction, and maybe that's why Todd Haynes' May December has resonated to me in the ways that it did. If you aren't familiar with Todd Haynes, you probably are most familiar with his lesbian drama Carol, or maybe his paranoia-filled horror about the mysterious illness affecting an upper-middle-class housewife in the 1995 classic Safe, or maybe his unauthorized biopic about Karen Carpenter featuring Barbie dolls, which is one of the greatest student films I've ever seen, Superstar. But all throughout Todd Haynes' career, I don't think he's been afraid to shy away from any of the subject matter told through mostly melodramatic tales, and with May December, he does one of the most important things an artist can ever do in approaching subject matter in this fashion in such a taboo way, which is implicating himself and recognizing that he is part of the problem, he is part of the system. There is no way to not be the problem when you are part of the system, because anybody can watch your art and take the most perverse thing away from it. By embracing this aspect of his part telling the story, the film May December, which is clearly based on the lives of Mary Kay Letourneau and Billy Fualau, can more clearly be about the repeated and perpetual nature of this trauma being told over and over again as we follow Natalie Portman's character in the film, Elizabeth, researching a role in an independent film, which, I think is actually a made-for-TV movie through some lenses of watching the film, about Letourneau's analog in the film, Gracie, played by Julianne Moore, and her partner Joe, played by Charles Melton, as we examine their life, begin to understand the perverse nature of their relationship, see how it affects every single member of their family as they begin to analyze Elizabeth's presence and question it, and slowly begin to become more uncomfortable as we take in these details, and as we see Elizabeth warp into Gracie, and simultaneously question what is the truth and how innocuous Gracie can really be. It's a rich film with wonderful melodrama, really one of my favorites of all time, and what struck me when the film came out was how so many people firmly believe that Billy Fualau should have been involved in the production, which he also agreed on when he talked about this much later, but also a lack of understanding that while the film was based on aspects about his life, it had nothing to do with him or his story even. It was all about how we as an audience engage with this real story and trauma about a man's real life, and for a man to be part of this, right, while I do understand the argument for that, while I'm not taking away people's thoughts about that, it would make for a much less compelling story, because May December is only as effective as it is because Todd Haynes allows himself to be guilty in telling the story. He's literally making a movie about a woman intruding on the life of someone, even though she has consent, even though she has permission to make this movie, even though she's so transparent about what's going on. For the most part, it doesn't make any of it better. It in fact makes it much, much worse. There is no sterile or tasteful way to tell this story and have it be nearly as effective, and I deeply respect if Billy wants to share his own story in whatever format or medium, but because of how damning the actions of Todd Haynes or Elizabeth or Gracie are in the film, we get more honesty about the horrible nature of everything that happened and make ultimately a much more human portrait of Joe within the film. So many had so many strong reactions about May December and the story it told and the distance it kept from its clear inspiration, with many followers even messaging me being offended that I loved and endorsed the film as much as I did, but reveling in my condemnation as well as everyone else in the productions, we must have the much more important conversation, which is how do we engage with all these stories and what do we do with them? But clearly all that uproar that people had changed nothing in how these stories exist. I mean, Ryan Murphy is more employed than ever before. As we close out this video, I think I want to emphasize we do a great job as a society pointing the finger and addressing our perceived moral failings around us. Whether that is as minimal as ultimately what Todd Haynes has done with May December and making an unauthorized biopic, something that is very common up until recently in the form of media, or something as outlandish as what appears in the fictional tale that is Red Rooms, but we often never interrogate how much of this behavior we see within ourselves. We never think about how close we are to that line. We never like to question how much of our behavior is close to being perverted perverse, or exploitative. We take a glimpse at the people who are harmed, and sometimes in our busy world, we dispose of them as quickly as we do these stories about the crimes that they've experienced. We see the Kellyannes, and we think that they are outliers. We never think that this is a gradual build and engaging in questionable behavior. We see her at the tail end of her depravity, at least from what we imagine, but we don't connect the dots between her and Ryan Murphy and true crime podcast hosts and TV producers and Todd Haynes, and not all this needs to be questioned or is morally wrong. We just never think about how we can get worse, and when it comes to the real case of Luigi Mangione, we are finding the case of a man being alleged of a horrible crime reduced down to reading book reviews or finding photos of him shirtless or thirsting over him, rather than attempting to grapple with what may be inconsistent politics. An action that he may or may not have caused spoke to the pain of so many, and the fact that we can point and stare at so many around us and seeing how they're carelessly engaging with the story of a man who is currently incarcerated and will never dig deeper or question themselves or even condemn their own behavior. Maybe I'm condemning myself for making this video, and I accept that. I accept if you try to condemn me. I'm even condemning a friend of mine who made a song about Luigi Mangione that you may be hearing in the background now. But there are extremes. I understand the parasocial connection, but I just think we need to question and interrogate it more, or just one day, you might be the Kellyanne of someone else's story. Thank you all again for this episode. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell. Please check out the other videos that I've made on my page. Again, next week is a much more traditional Halloween video. It is about a horror movie franchise that has 14 movie entries. I'm not sure if anybody can get it. You probably can see on my letterbox right now if you just go look, and go ahead, do that. Spoil it for people, I don't care. But this was James. Please take care, and I'll see you all next time.